Hello and welcome to my third video where we're making an FPS in Unity. In our first two videos we managed to get some basic player movement and camera look working, so we're able to walk around and see a world full of checkerboard. The goal for this video is to change this checkerboard plane into an awesome island of adventure. So let's start learning how to use the terrain tools. So the terrain tool is kind of the best way to do outdoor environments. And it's incredibly flexible and has a lot more than I will cover in this video. I'm really just going to cover some of the basic uses of it, but it's worth spending some time learning how to either loads height maps, saving out height maps, or doing anything with it. So let's start with painting the terrain. This is probably one of the most basic things you're going to want to do with your terrain, and that's actually kind of making mountains, making hills. So we want to kind of do something where we have a place to have essentially an adventure. We need some zone for us. What I want to do is have an area for us to have a dungeon that we can enter. So we're going to either need like a mountain range or some kind of area to put an enemy camp. I want to put some trees on here. Maybe if you want to explore using water assets, maybe making this an island or having a lake. So some of the stuff is that I want to do, and I'm not going to use the whole video to show me building an island. I will build the rest of my island off camera after we finish looking at some of the basic fundamental tools that we want to use. So I guess before I actually start painting, and you can kind of see this tool brush, if we jump over to the options here, we can see a lot of just settings for this terrain. The ones that we primarily care most about is the size of the terrain. So if you feel this is too small, then you can change that. And I thought there was an initial height somewhere, but perhaps that is no longer a feature. So right now, the terrain really starts at the lowest height it can be. You can see for this brush here, if I am on the raise or lower terrain, it says left click to raise and hold shift and left click to lower. But if I'm holding down shift, the terrain is actually already at its lowest possible height. So anything we can do will just elevate the terrain. And you can see how fast, I just simply clicked it. So the brush size, the brush opacency, as well as some of the brush tools are going to play a role in how we're going to sculpt some terrain. And you can watch how fast this happens. I'm just going to click and hold. And as I move the mouse very rapidly, that became an unmanageable amount of terrain. So lowering the opacency will lower essentially the rate at which it modifies the terrain. I don't really recommend this round brush because it's not really very organic. It could be useful for large operations, but in general, I find that this large brush doesn't make very good terrain. Control Z is also your friend for undoing. So typically, like if I'm going to try to elevate some land up and I want it to be kind of bumpy looking hills, I might use the more feathered brush where I can elevate this up and it looks a little less extreme. Or I could use some of the other specialized brushes. Now you can actually import new brushes into Unity. So if you have some experience making brushes, either for Photoshop or for GIMP, or finding a pack of terrain brushes, you might find that to be a useful thing to import. Of course, why is there a star? But So we can paint the terrain. So what we might want to do is raise up some hills, make some mountains. If you want to get everything to be the same height, so I mentioned possibly doing like an island, and I might want to use the set height feature to get everything to be a specific height. Now I originally thought, there we go. We can manually just do it right here. We can make everything a certain height. Like if we specify 5 there and click flatten all, it made this height 5. Now to put that in perspective of the units, if we made this height 5, you can kind of see that that is truly 5 height in terms of Unity units. So if I wanted the player to stand on that, I might need to be up on 6 so that when I hit play, I'm not falling through the world. If your player is like even partially stuck in the ground, there's a chance you might fall through the world. So here I popped up because I think the majority of my collider was above the terrain. And here I think I fell through it. It's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, I'm negative 100 height. So that's something to keep in mind. What you might want your initial height to be with this terrain if you're using the set height here. So maybe I want this to be 10. That will give me... Now the maximum height, I don't really think there is much of max. I don't know why you would want to go up to 100. Because like I said, I don't think there's really a feasible max. But I would pick a height that makes some sense so that we could lower it to have some kind of valleys. So I'm going to set it to 10. That way I could lower things around the edges if I wanted to make this. Oh, that's still on set height, like lower terrain. And so I could maybe lower the terrain a little bit around the edges if I wanted to create like a coastline, so that there is some amount of lowering that I can do. I don't plan on programming any sort of water behavior, so we'll just make like water completely impassable, so that if the player attempts to go into water, it just prevents them. There's an invisible wall that'll keep the player from going into water. So I might make an island out of this, and then I'll put some mountains on here. Now, whether or not I will need to extend out my terrain, I don't know. We won't really know until a little bit later. So what you could start doing is start trying to sculpt up mountains and other types of terrain features by using the raise and lower. Now, stamp terrain, kind of interesting. So stamp terrain lets you specify a height that you want, and then it just sets to that height. So we gain, you can see that it's going to add this on here. So it just gains that height. I don't really use the stamp terrain too terribly much. I primarily use the raise and lower and then smooth and set height to do things. So let's make a few, and I'm just going to go find the player so I can kind of do this near the player. So I'm going to raise up some things, maybe make a few more mountainous looking things. This is definitely an art where Control Z will be your friend, and it just takes a lot of patience to try to design things that look good. I will definitely say I'm more of a programmer than I am an environment artist. And so I have a lot of respect for people who are good at this. This is making really nice terrain that's organic, interesting. I'm definitely a little bit better at the indoor type of stuff. But anyway, so like I've started a little bit with this mountain ridge. We're going to start adding some textures to this to make this a little bit more exciting. So you can use this to sculpt, to build your terrain. But I have enough right now that I'm going to continue on. A feature that might be useful, but I think we're going to kind of avoid it, is the paint holes feature. Paint holes punches a hole through your terrain. Now, you might wonder why you would want that, just to rip right a hole through the terrain. But you could possibly put other models inside of here, so you could make an actual cave, and then have some 3D models inside of here, so you can just kind of like rip right into it. Obviously, you'd want to probably put some kind of model around the edge of this jaggedness. But you could create a cave by doing that, because the terrain tool is, I want to make sure I use the right word, it is convex, meaning you can't make like a cave naturally inside of this. Well, when I say convex, like, yes, I know this is not convex, that if you have a point here and you have a point here, it goes outside it can't be on top of itself. Like it can't double over like this. This can't create a cliff ledge that leans over. A value like any given XZ position only has a single Y position. So convex really isn't the correct word, I guess. But you could use paint holes to fix that, because then you could put something underneath here. You could actually put like a cave inside of it. All right, so let's get to the exciting part. So we can sculpt our terrain and build it, when we get a chance. But the fun part is painting the textures. So we want to start putting maybe grass, rock, sand, something other than this checkerboard. And that's where we're going to probably need to load some assets into our project. So you could check out the Unity Asset Store, and it's a good place to start for some free assets. I'll provide a link to some of the free ones that I think would be worth taking a look at. So there is Unity Technologies, obviously is the company that makes Unity. They do have a few free assets that you could use that are compatible with the scriptable rendering pipeline. So if you're looking for assets, we're looking for URP assets. I mean, technically we could switch it to HD, but I don't know if we have the computing power to do that. We are not using the built-in renderer, so we're looking for things that are compatible with URP. So like ground textures, vegetation, trees. So you could download some of these to get started, and it would be a great way to start getting used to playing around with some of this. Now, bear in mind, a lot of these textures are very high quality, and these file sizes can be quite large. So this terrain pack is already 3 gigabytes. That is going to make your project very large when you import these. So I'll include a few links to some free assets in the video that you might want to check out. I've already imported some assets. So now keep in mind, whatever assets you're using, there will be some slight differences, but the general process is the same. So I'm going to start by actually setting up what are called terrain layers. Terrain layers are where we paint grass, rocks, dirt. It's just the base texture of the terrain. Right now we don't have any terrain layers, so we can't really paint any textures. The first one that you pick will become the default, and the entire terrain will inherit that color. So a lot of packages will already have pre-made whatchamacallit, terrain layers for you. Now, a terrain layer isn't that hard to put together, but a terrain layer is essentially a diffuse texture, which is the actual, like, the color, what it looks like. So this is sand. So you can see this kind of looks like sand. And some of the higher quality textures will have normal maps, which will help with the appearance of making it look 3D without it actually being 3D, and masking maps, which also assist in that type of process. But realistically, you only need the diffuse. That will create texture. The rest of it is just to make it look pretty. So going back to my terrain, if I go to Edit Terrain Layers, I have the choice between creating a layer and adding a layer. Now, if I want to do this myself, I could create the layer, but let's start with Add Layer, assuming that the texture packs that you downloaded have some kind of layer already there. So my texture pack already does have a few layers. I've got some sand, soil, grass, etc. So I'll pick whatever I think makes the most sense. I'm going to start with grass. So by picking grass, you'll notice that becomes the default for the entire terrain. Then if I wanted to add another one, I just go to Add Layer, and maybe I can start adding some dirt. So maybe I want some soil. And then I can pick a specific terrain. We can collapse that if that gets annoying. And use a brush. And you'll want a higher opacency than we did before, because as you can see, a single touch of the brush is pretty faint. If you hold it, it applies it relatively powerfully. So like a single tap, if you want a really faint, but clicking and dragging will do a very strong application of that. And you can actually see here that this terrain, this dirt is being blended into the grass. So like you can kind of spot it when I'm actually in this mode here. So it kind of blends the two textures together, which is really cool. So you can really create some variety in what the ground looks like, so it doesn't look like a field of repeating grass. Again, this falls into the realm of this is more of an art than a science. And so, that's kind of tricky. Now, if you wanted to create your own, if you just go to Create, it will start by wanting you to pick the actual graphic for it. So you would have to go find whatever you called your texture. Maybe I called it Ground Forest Rock. And then that's my texture, and then I just double click that. And you can see that gets called New Layer, and then I can start painting that. I can actually go into more depth if I just go to, if I actually pull up the layer, which gets, where did it get placed? Usually it gets called, it gets placed in whatever folder you had open at the time. You can see it just got called New Layer right here. And then you can go through and add a normal map and a mask map. So you can adjust some of these settings for if you wanted to create your own layers, but a lot of terrain asset packs will have the layers pre-made for you. If I delete it, the terrain doesn't get very happy about that because this is missing. So you'd actually want to go through and tell it to remove that layer, and then it will kick it back to the default color, which is this grass right there. And again, if you tap that thing, so even at a 10% strength of the brush, that if I set it to 100, single tap almost applies the entirety of the brush. So you can use this to start creating some interesting mountain regions. So if I wanted to add a layer for some more rocky type of terrain, then I can start making my mountains have this more rock type of appearance. And if that's like too extreme, that still kind of looks like a little bit foresty. I guess that's the best I've got. I mean, might play around with some packages. But now here's the thing. If I'm not happy with this texture, I can still paint it and then go back and replace this later, because I can just choose to replace the layer, and all of the painting that I did with this layer will get replaced with that new texture. So it's not really a loss for me to start painting this and then decide, well, maybe I don't like this brush, or I don't like the way that these rocks look. I gotta watch out for those hotkeys. Very easy to deselect my painting brush when I'm trying to use the fly cam here. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of a quick painting. I'll, again, clean it up a little bit off camera. So I just want to get some rock here so that the mountains look actually like mountains. And then what you would want to do is try to blend the textures where they meet. All right, so that's not as good as this is going to get here. So maybe I would take the dirt texture, and so instead of this just very abrasive meeting of these two textures, I might, oop, that's a little too strong. I might start tapping in some dirt and really even maybe shrink the brush size. So again, you can see that this could potentially take a lot of time if you're wanting to try to create, you know, a really nice looking terrain. So that way I'm getting a little bit of dirt around the edge of these mountains. And maybe I might increase the brush a little and just do some very light taps here, so that as I'm getting a little bit further away from the mountain, you know, it blends a little bit more to the grass, so that, you know, the left side looks a lot nicer than the right side, because I'm putting a little bit of effort into trying to blend these textures so it's not this kind of abrasive swapping between the two. Now I'm clicking rapidly instead of clicking and dragging, because clicking and dragging kind of creates too strong of an effect. I only want like a really faint application of the brush. And I would need to look into that more. What I suspect is it's applying a click effect. So like if I just click and I don't move the mouse, it only applies it once. But the moment I move the mouse, I think it applies it for every like pixel the mouse moves. It counts it as a new click event. So I don't know. I really wish those hotkeys would stop deselecting this. And again, you might want to like write down some of your settings, because like if you need to remember what size brush you were using for this very light blending back into the grass. Maybe I want this hill to kind of be a little bit more dirt than grass. And you can always go back to the grass and then repaint grass on top of this, so, you know. Like I said, it's a lot of terrain we might end up painting. Now, there are some tools out there that will kind of like procedurally generate this painting, and I haven't explored those, but I know that if you're trying to do this on a professional level, I suspect the best way to do this would be to probably use one of the procedural tools and then go in and hand touch up everything so that it kind of looks a little bit nicer. Because it looks much nicer when we try to blend this manually than if we just have these hard edges. All right, so that's the painting tool. You definitely want to spend some time using that, making our terrain look nice so that our mountains kind of have, you know, a good blending here. Now, I will point out the thing that I find most hilarious about the terrain tool. So, you know, we can't go up it, and we tend to stick. The character controller is suspiciously generous on what it considers grounded. So if you keep on tapping the jump button, you can kind of, ooh, there's an unpainted spot. You can kind of scale up this, whereas if you just try to walk up it, you can't. And I do always find that amusing in any sort of 3D game that was made in Unity. You can kind of tell when they may have just used the character controllers and the grounded, because you can tend to just scale terrain bizarrely well just by like rapidly mashing jump and re-jumping up the side. It's really hard to go about fixing that. You really have to rewrite your own grounded check to be a little bit stricter than what the normal character controller is doing. So I'm not going to worry about that, but bear that in mind as you're designing a level. The player may be able just to kind of hop up the side. That's where invisible walls come in. We could just put some invisible walls here so that the player can't do that. And honestly, as somebody who cares about game design, I do truly hate invisible walls. But if you feel your players are getting too sneaky, you can always start throwing in some invisible walls. It is really not the most ideal way to do this by just taking a cube, but you could try to align it to parts of the mountain face. So like you might do something like this, and then you'll just have a couple of these walls here. Like I said, as somebody who truly loves game design, I do feel this is like cheating. But if you want to keep your player out of certain areas, you got to do what you got to do. And so the player won't be able to scale these walls. Right now, they're not invisible. And so, you know, we try to do our little hopping gimmick. We get shut down by the wall. And then all you really do is you just take this and you turn off the mesh renderer, and then there's your invisible wall. So we head towards that spot again, and we're like, haha, let me climb up this wall. And then all of a sudden you can't anymore. I'm like, why? Why can't I go up that wall? And then, you know, there's an invisible wall keeping us from going up that, so that the player can't scale a mountain and then just cheese past whatever barrier you had there in place. And then now they're on the other side of the challenge or whatever. So, I don't know, keep that in mind. That you might want to invest in invisible walls so that you can keep the player out of areas, so you don't have them scaling the mountains like a fool. All right, Next up, let's take a look at putting some trees in here. Trees are a lot of fun. So hopefully you've imported a package with some kind of trees. So let's go to the terrain tool. Now, and then we're going to go to the plant trees tool. Now, many packages will include the trees as both prefabs, as well as the ability to use these prefabs inside of the terrain tool. So yes, I could go through and manually drag in some trees. However, the downside to doing it this way is these are prefabs, and if I did it this way, if I remember what tree I pulled out, they would be identical every time. And so that becomes a little bit obvious to players if you're doing that. So the terrain tool with the paint trees option, we have to load up a tree. So we just go to edit tree, add tree, and then we just drag and drop a prefab of a tree. So I'll just take this tree here, place it in there, and then hit add. And so it has some randomness to it. So like you can control how random the size of the tree is, and some color variation to the tree, like how much tinting would it get, so that when I start using this paint tool, if I want to paint a lot of trees, maybe we'll lower the density. Notice how we're getting trees that just that one tree is producing trees of a variety of heights. And if you really got in there, you could tell that there's some variety in the color too. So these trees don't really completely look the same. They're different thicknesses, they're different heights. And so if you have enough tree models, the player's not going to really notice that during gameplay. They're just going to see a forest with a couple different trees. So maybe we'll go through and edit trees, add another type of tree. And I believe these settings are per tree. So like you can have, no, these are not per tree. This is just whenever you use the brush. Now, again, that might be too dense, but if we start throwing a few other trees into this mix, we can get some pretty nice amount of tree coverage. So I've got a mountain, I've got trees, and a variety of trees. And so as the player kind of goes through this, they'll appreciate that you have different types of trees. And as long as you have a variety of trees in a location, this again might be too thick of trees or too thick of the same type of tree. So we would want to kind of go through and hit this with several different of these tree brushes, so that it's not all that same type of tree. And they still have their colliders. So the prefabs actually do have colliders, which would impede attacks and impede the player and monsters. So monsters and stuff will have a fun time pathing through a forest. So we can kind of create some nice environments using that. Now the next part is the detail brush. Details are things like, so moving off of the tree brush, the detail brush is things like grass. So there's two different types. There's the detail mesh and a grass texture. A detail mesh is a prefab, so it basically has a 3D model, and a grass texture is just a flat 2D plane. So depending on the package, you might have one or the other. I believe I have detail meshes, and so if I switch over to like my foliage and grass, now one thing to watch out for is you cannot use anything that has what's called level of detail with this. Level of detail is like an automatic scaling. The further you get away from this object, the simpler it becomes. So that's actually why I have this version here that doesn't have the level of detail. I just went through and deleted the level of detail stuff. And so if I go to add detail mesh, I could take some of these grass textures. Let's find a nice green grass. Place it into that detail. I could play with some of these settings depending on if it ends up becoming too tall. If I need to bring those back up, I can just pull up edit and then change those. So like if I want to start having some grass here, if you click and drag, it's okay. It does put a lot of grass down. Unity kind of does its own level of detail with some of this stuff. And so now, instead of just that flat grass texture, I've got these little grass models on top of it. Now, these models might just be relatively simple. And when you look at them, they look okay. Being that they're grass meshes, they will also cast shadows. So that's something to keep in mind on a performance level, that if you just use grass textures, those typically do not. And I actually don't know if I have any grass textures here. I don't think I do. No. So this would just be a simple like grass sprite, and it would place those on the world. Those are a little bit more performance friendly. So with these tools, you can actually start going through. Also, if you want to erase them, if you just hold shift, it'll take out the grass. So with these tools, you'll actually be able to start building a island for our adventure to take place on. So I'm going to load up a couple different types of grass here. Maybe I want this one to not be as frequent, so I'll just, drop the strength. Oops. So we need to find a good little middle ground here. And you do want some variety, because if you have all the same grass, it'll look pretty silly. So, with some mixture of the grass, it gives, a nice mix of terrain. And using trees, grass, and just these ground textures, we'll be able to create a lot of interesting things. I think you can put rocks in here too. I think I do have rocks. Like detail meshes don't have to be grass. You could have like different types of rocks. But see, this rock has the level of detail. So if I wanted to use this, I would have to go through and take this model and put it on the parent and take out the level of detail. So if I wanted to use these rocks, I'm kind of stuck manually placing them in. And then they're kind of, in the world, but that's fine. So you can kind of see that there's now rocks that have colliders that make me bump. So maybe I would place the rocks kind of near the mountain to give it, a little bit more of a rocky appearance. Now, these, when you bring them in, like these, because these are prefabs, you might need to think about just actually like rotating them so that they're not all the same rotation, because that would be kind of obvious from a player standpoint. And so now we can start putting some rocks. Maybe we would need a few other details near here. But we would be able to kind of create an environment that's somewhat convincing. And so we'll conclude the video here. I still want to take a look at building an area for kind of an enemy base. You may want to look at assets. I'll include a link in this video where you could place some structures. You'll definitely want to try to put a door, because I do want to take a look at interactables, such as a door that you can walk up to and press E to open. But we'll take a look at some of that in the next video. So as you build your map, make sure you leave a space where we can put some enemy camp, basically a dungeon entrance, so that we can look at maybe transitioning to an indoor level in maybe 1 or 2 videos time. So thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting and fun. So have fun decorating your island, and when you see this island again, mine will be fleshed out a little bit more. So get decorating.